So this is New Ulm, Minnesota. This is a town here in Minnesota that was founded by German immigrants. And in a new segment for this channel, I'm gonna take a pretty interesting person out to lunch. We're gonna get some authentic German food right here at Weigel's Kaiserhof. It's a restaurant that's been here since 1938. And my guest today is Paul Wojahn. He's 103 years old. We just celebrated his 103rd birthday. He's a World War II vet that has some of the most amazing stories to share with us. So we're gonna go in, get some authentic German food, and hear the stories of who I believe is one of the greatest American heroes. So this is Paul Wojahn. Paul, you and I have known each other for a couple of years now. You were born in 1921. You are 103 years old. We just celebrated your 103rd birthday. And just to put that into perspective, Warren Harding was the president when you were born. World War I had ended 2.5 years earlier. And you are lucky enough to have seen the majority of the history of the 20th century unfold in real time. You served in the Marines in World War II. I kind of want to start the story of your life at the beginning. So you were born in North Dakota, and then shortly after, your family came to Minnesota. Yeah. What was life like growing up in 1920s Minnesota?
First thing I remember is a farm down in Albin Township. In fact, I remember the kitchen and the different parts of the building.
And what kind of foods did you eat when you were growing up on a farm in the early 20th century?
I guess it was the same as what we're using now, pretty much. Cattle and hogs and chickens and crops, mostly oats, maybe some wheat. We did raise some flax once in a while. And corn, of course. Some later on, soybeans came in. I grew up, you eat what's put in front of you.
But breakfast back in the day wasn't very different than what we have today. It's bacon, eggs.
Well, you didn't have some of the conveniences that we got now, but basically just a cook stove. And
was it a wood-burning cook stove?
Yeah.
And so how long would it take your mom to make breakfast back then? Do you remember?
No, I guess I didn't pay much attention to
it. So what was day-to-day life like back in the 1920s and the 1930s when you were growing up here?
I guess I just never thought much about it, that you took things as they come. And
right. All right, so lunch just came. We've got basically the sampler platter. We've got German-style ribs, German-style potato salad, which I really love. And we've got two types of German sausage. Red one is landjaeger, and that's pork and beef. And the other is called bratwurst, and that's just pork. And some sauerkraut. So this is the landjaeger. This is beef and pork. It's a traditional German sausage.
Landjaeger means hunter's land lunch.
Hunter's land lunch. I'm gonna try the hunter's land lunch. That is really meaty, really juicy, really flavorful.
Well, bratwurst, brat is just a certain type of sausage.
Pretty much everybody knows what a bratwurst is, but the bratwurst is one of Germany's contributions to, well, what is now American food. Still German food, but we love it here in America. All right, so let's try the bratwurst here. Wow, that is really meaty, very flavorful. There is a major difference between the bratwurst that you can have at an authentic German restaurant like this, and of course the stuff that you buy in the grocery store. Certainly not going to be as flavorful, certainly not going to be as meaty and as juicy as it is here. This is delicious. I'm going in for the potato salad. Have you tried your potato salad yet?
Yeah.
What did you think of your potato salad?
Good.
So German potato salad is a little bit different than other types of potato salad. First of all, it's served hot. It's very sweet, but then it's also savory because we've got chunks of bacon in it. And it's not swimming in mayonnaise, it's not swimming in mustard. And this looks amazing. We're gonna try this out. Yeah. Still warm, the potatoes are cooked to perfection, and that sauce is so nice and both savory and sweet at the same time. Every mouthful that you get has all these different flavors that really complement each other. And look at that rib, that is nice and meaty. There's a lot of meat on that bone. That sauce looks nice and rich. All right, so we're gonna try out the ribs here. Oh yeah, that is fall off the bone tender. That sauce that they use is unlike any barbecue sauce. It has a very smoky flavor to it, but it has a very rich flavor to it, and it complements the ribs. It doesn't overpower the ribs. Wouldn't you agree? Mm-hmm. Every time I say something, you seem to agree with me. Are you just saying that I'm smart, or are you just being polite?
I agree that you're right.
So, your parents were immigrants from Germany, and so is this very similar to the food that you grew up with?
Basically, it was meat and potatoes.
Just meat and potatoes, good old meat and potatoes. But did you ever have authentic German food like this growing up in your household, or
No.
basically what was available on the farm?
Yeah.
So now that we're done with lunch, we're gonna drink our beer, we're gonna continue talking. So there's something about this particular guy right here that is absolutely incredible, and that I remember your 100th birthday party 3 years ago. And he wore jeans and cowboy boots and drove himself to his own 100th birthday party. That is incredible. I remember you pulling up in your van, and I was like, he drove himself to his 100th birthday party, which was just incredible. Here we are 3 years later, we're sitting here having beers, we're talking, but now that we're done with lunch, I want to continue your story, and I want to take us to that day, December 7th, 1941, the day that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Where were you when that happened?
I was working at Douglas Aircraft in California. My cousin and I had actually gone out there to get work in a defense plant with the idea of staying out of the service. And after the Japs hit Pearl Harbor, a few days later, the scuttlebutt got going around the plant at Douglas that they were putting women in some of the departments that we were in, and if they did that, then we'd get drafted.
Right.
And I said I was allergic to drafts, so I came back to the farm. And then the next summer it started getting close to my draft time, and I wasn't going to be drafted, so I enlisted
When did you enlist?
in June.
In June of 1942, this would have been?
Take that back, August 18th to be exact.
August 18th, 1942 is when you enlisted. What was it about the Marines that made you want to join the Marines as opposed to the
They were on
Army?
Guadalcanal already at that
Right.
time. And it was advertised that they were the first unit that was beating the Japanese at their own game, and that they were the best trained and toughest fighting outfit that the U.S. military had. And I figured, oh, if I gotta go, I'm going to pick the toughest one. And so I enlisted in the Marine Corps. I'm not sorry.
I wouldn't be either. So you joined, and then they shipped you off to Australia first, correct?
I went to boot camp at San Diego.
Right. At Pendleton.
And I ended up at Camp Pendleton. From there, we boarded a ship to left San Diego on board ship. I didn't know where we were going, but we ended up in Australia.
So when you left California on the ship, they didn't tell you where you were going?
We left about 10th of March, I think it was, and ended up in Australia on the 30th of March.
Oh, so it didn't take that long. It was a couple of week voyage.
Melbourne.
But for the entire month of March of 1943, you didn't know where you would end up on the other side.
No. But the ship we were on was too fast for convoy. It was converted to a luxury liner. USS Mount Vernon, formerly luxury liner Washington.
Now that's interesting, because it was the luxury liner Washington. When it was enlisted by the Marines, they renamed it Mount Vernon,
Yeah.
which we all know from history was Washington's home.
Yeah.
So the first time that you saw action during the war was where?
We landed in around the Melbourne area, and then we were there for the better part of 6 months. Then we moved up to Brisbane, and then from Brisbane we went to New Guinea,
New Guinea?
and then New Guinea we went to New Britain. That was our first campaign.
So you first saw action on New Britain.
Yeah,
And then
Cape Gloucester.
right. And then from there, New Caledonia.
Yeah,
So I've been to New Caledonia before, and where were you in New Caledonia? Were you on Grand Tar, on the Big Island?
on the main island.
On the main
as far as
island?
I know, yeah.
So you probably went in through maybe Noumea
Yeah.
on the Big Island.
Yeah.
And by this time in history, Guadalcanal in the Solomons, It was already secured, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So from New Caledonia,
We went to Peleliu.
Peleliu.
Yeah.
Peleliu was one of those battles during the war that was not only the most difficult battle in the Pacific, but it was the turning point.
Yeah.
The Japanese had an airstrip on that island, and that was the objective.
Yeah.
So what is that island? Maybe 2.5 miles wide by 5.5 miles long.
Yeah.
There were 11,000 Japanese soldiers on that island. And when you were there, you were part of 28,000 Marines that invaded that island.
This captain of our outfit before we went in, he told us how many Japs were on the island and how many Marines were going ashore. And he says, there isn't room for all of us. So you decide who stays.
So on Peleliu, it was called Operation Stalemate, and they thought that it would take 4 days to secure that island. It wound up taking 2 months. And it was the highest casualties of any amphibious assault in U.S. military history. That was a tough island to take. What were you feeling when you first stepped foot on that island?
I don't know, you just had orders to go ashore and you got your rifle and the ammunition all set and going. If something got in your way, you could shoot and no questions asked.
It's very hard for us in my generation, the generations that have followed, to really wrap their heads around what that's like. To charge an island knowing that on the hill, on the mountains, the enemy is embedded in caves, they've got machine gun nests, they're firing on you. How did you get over that fear?
You just, you do what you gotta do. It's what you're training for,
So once on the island, you're there for 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
And the Japanese are embedded in these cave systems.
Yeah.
And it was very hard to fight that way. They had the high ground. You were down on the beach. How did you take the island?
You just go in and do it.
You just go ahead and do it. That's the best answer yet. You were telling me a story once about the Sherman tanks and how they were outfitted to basically take care of the Japanese soldiers that were embedded in these caves.
Yeah, and they had put flamethrowers on them, shot that right into the cave. If it didn't burn them, it took the oxygen out of the cave and they died of lack of oxygen.
And that's the way the island was won.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me a story once before, but you were waiting for your orders to invade. And you told me that you were bored, basically, on the ship. There was nothing really to do while you were waiting for your orders. You knew that you were going to invade, but you just didn't know when.
Yeah.
And you told me a story that I'll never forget, that you went on the bow of the boat, you looked over the bow, and you were describing all the fish.
Maybe heard of flying fish?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Off the bow of the ship, you'd watch some flying fish flying off the bow of the ship. And porpoises, they were playing tag with the bow of the ship too.
Wow.
And that was the most interesting part of it when I was on there. I could stand and watch them for hours.
So, in between all of these battles, you found this moment of peace.
Yeah.
Standing there on the bow, watching these dolphins and porpoises and flying fish. I remember you telling me that story. That story is going to stick with me for life because, we see all the documentaries and it just seems like it's battle after battle after battle with nothing in between. And to hear these little nuances of the way that you found peace in this conflict was to do that. I will never forget that. And the objective on that island, as I mentioned, was the airstrip because the next battle was in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And then Okinawa.
Yeah.
And then, well, if Truman hadn't made the decision that he had, it would have been mainland Japan.
Yeah.
And if that would have happened, it would be very interesting if we were sitting here now in 2024 having this conversation.
Actually, we figured if we ended up actually landing in Japan, mainland, that maybe less than a third of us would survive. Because you'd expect women and children and...
Everybody would pick up a gun.
Yeah, a gun or a weapon of some kind.
If Truman hadn't made the decision to drop the bombs, would we have won?
A good question.
Yeah?
We figured that was the best thing that ever happened.
Oh, I bet. Flash forward to Okinawa. Once you got to Okinawa, you were a truck driver.
Yeah.
And you were running supplies to the front line and back. The war in Europe had already ended 3 months earlier in May. When you found out that the war in Europe was over, Hitler was dead, VE Day had happened in May of 1945. When that news reached you, how did that feel to hear that our boys had won in Europe?
I guess we didn't really pay that much attention to it because we were still fighting the Japs.
Yeah.
Until that was done, the war wasn't over.
And then in August of 1945, you got the word Japanese surrendered after the second bomb.
Yeah.
But can you describe that feeling when you finally heard that the Japanese had surrendered and the war was over?
Just relaxation.
Relaxation.
Yeah. Yeah, that was something different.
I'll bet it was something different. Did you have this feeling that I survived? I'm going to be fine now?
Well, I don't know if I paid much attention to it at the time. But
it was just the war was over, yeah. I'll be home soon,
yeah.
The job was done.
Well, like I say, you do what you got to do, and when it's over, you go to something else.
See, this is why your generation is called the greatest generation. Because you had a job to do, you didn't whine about it, you didn't shy away from it, you got the job done. And when it was over, you and your brothers and sisters in arms back then literally did nothing short of save the world. If you hadn't done what you did in the South Pacific, if our boys in the Army didn't do what they did in Europe, yeah. If we didn't stop the Axis powers, this would be an extremely different world, yeah. A world without freedom. Us Americans, we love to beat that drum about freedom.
Yeah.
But not a lot of us really understand what it took to achieve that freedom. And if they would have won, if the Axis powers would have won, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now.
I don't expect either one of us would be.
Nope, and I don't think the United States would be here right now. You know, I know that a lot of World War II veterans don't like to be called heroes, but in my opinion, you are just about as big a hero as they come.
Well, like I say, you just do what you got to do, and
do what you got to do.
When it's done, you go to do something else.
So after the war, I remember you telling me that you arrived in California, yeah. And your parents didn't know if you were alive or dead, but they didn't have a telephone.
No.
So I remember you telling me that you actually had to call the neighbor down the street.
I called my girlfriend, which later became my wife. Her folks had a phone.
Her folks had a phone.
And there was 3 miles between us. So I called her, and then she went and told my folks that I was back in the States.
I can't imagine the relief your parents felt to hear that news. So you came home, got married, and you had one daughter, and then you went on into essentially law enforcement. Yeah. You were a game warden.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I farmed for, I forget how many years, and then a guy had a flood rain and drowned out a third of my cropland, so I had to get a job driving a truck or doing something different. I drove a standard all bulk truck for a year, and then I took the game warden exam and passed that, and I went to work for the state as a game warden.
So this is, again, in my opinion, an American hero sitting right here at 103 years old. The respect that I have for you and for everyone who not only protects our freedoms, fights in the armed forces, but certainly from World War II. If the sacrifices that you and so many others didn't rise to that action, we wouldn't be here right now. I just want to tell you that I have a tremendous amount of respect, and I want to thank you for your service. 103 years old, and still, this man beats me at dominoes every single time we play. How do you do that?
Day by day, you do what you got to do.
And that seems to be the answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure having lunch with you.
Yeah.
And Now he's going to go beat me again in dominoes right after we finish this beer.
Yeah.
So Paul Wojahn is an American hero. It was a pleasure to get together once again at this restaurant, get lunch with him, and just hear all of his stories. I could do that for hours. And when we get together, I do. So guys, comment below, let me know what you think about these ideas where I have lunch with an interesting person. So guys, if you're hungry for more, check out that video right there. If you're starving for more, check out that playlist right there. Right now, I'm heading back over to Paul's house, and he is once again gonna kick my butt in dominoes.